is a work session of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, and we are discussing Bill 35-21, prevailing wage requirements. I would like to take a moment to thank our council staff for the responsiveness to council members' questions and feedback. And I hope that we can get through most or all of the issues today. This bill will align with state requirements and lower the threshold for county financed construction contracts to ensure all contracts that exceed $250,000 ensure workers are paid the prevailing wage. And it is important that we ensure contractors working on behalf of the county are paid a living wage, particularly at a time when so many have been negatively impacted by COVID. We do have several decision points today. I will point out that in addition to the original bill, we do have some additional amendments. I know Councilmember Jawando has forwarded some amendments that are included in the packet. And so what I would like is to have Ms. Luding McCartney-Green set the stage for us in terms of what the bill does. And then if she could go point by point in terms of the decisions that we would have to make. But before we do that, I would like to turn it over to allow Councilmember Hucker, who is the lead sponsor of the bill, to make some comments, and then we can begin the conversation. And welcome, Councilmember Jawando. And if you'd like to make some comments, we'll also allow you to do that as well, so we can get into the actual discussion. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to you and all the members of the GO Committee for taking up this important bill. Thanks to Councilmember Jawando for co-sponsoring it with me, and Ms. McCartney-Green for all your work on this as well. And Grace and Ash, appreciate your inputs as well. It's very, very thoughtful. I remember that recent Capital One commercial that says this should be the easiest decision in the history of decisions. I think passing this bill is overdue. Our existing prevailing wage law was passed 23 years ago, thanks to Councilmember Urban, my predecessor in this seat. That's a long time to go for a major law without an update. And so I appreciate you, Madam Chair, for bringing this up in time for the debate on state legislation, because this topic is coming up there as well. We all believe in the living wage law that we have for our service contracts and our minimum wage law for everybody else in the private sector. I've spent lots of time working on both of those, and prevailing wage laws are inspired by the same philosophy to make sure that we are paying our workers in Montgomery County fairly, and our Montgomery County contractors have a level playing field to compete for our own dollars, and that as much as possible we're keeping them here in Montgomery County when we're spending our money on public construction projects. So I think it aligns with our racial equity goals, our economic goals, our climate goals, because it puts our contractors and our local workers to work and has them not driving all over the region for a job. And that's why it's supported by both business and labor. Like the original prevailing wage law, Davis and Bacon were Republican and Democrat back when we had bipartisanship. And I think this is something we all ought to agree on, and it's a long overdue update. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando would like to make some comments.
Sure, just briefly so we can get into the meat of it. I agree, appreciate working on this with Councilmember Hucker, and glad we're taking it up. It is a very, very important thing. You know, we believe that anything that's built, particularly for public use and for our community, the people who build it and create it should be paid a living, life-sustaining wage for themselves and their families. And it's embedded in so much of what we do. And I think this update is sorely needed. It'll bring us in alignment with action that was taken at the state level and other large counties throughout the state. And I think, there's some amendments we'll consider today that I think can improve it and even more align it. But really happy to work on this, and glad that I think everyone on the council or most of the co-sponsored it. So really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that Director Shetty is here, as well as Ms. Deno, and thank you for all your work as well in responding to the questions that were forwarded. All right, so Ms. McCartney-Green, if you could walk us through, again, set the stage of what the bill does, and then if we can begin to go through each of the decision points, and we'll open it up for discussion and then vote.
Thank you, Chair Navarro, and good afternoon to council members. And so Bill 3521, the purpose of this bill is to expand the applicability of the county prevailing wage law for construction contracts by lowering the threshold value. And so currently this threshold value is set at $500,000, but this bill seeks to lower it to $250,000. And so with this change, what this would actually do is that construction jobs above that amount would be required to pay the state prevailing wage rates for local projects. And this would include service contracts. And we're going to talk a little bit more of discussion of service contracts and an amendment recommended by Councilmember Hucker. But wanted to notice that the bill does plan for expanding the definition of construction, including certain service or mechanical contracts, and then would also establish a local hiring mandate, and also looking at public-private partnerships and an exclusion for affordable housing developments. With that being said, I'm going to jump right into our issues and kind of scroll down to my packet. And I am on page 3 for the council members to follow along with, also for the public. And so the first issue for the committee to consider is, should we amend the language related to the county prevailing wage threshold limit? I talked about the limit. It's currently set at the 500,000 mark. And with the state bill that was passed in Annapolis in the 2021 session, House Bill 37, Senate Bill 35, the county can now has the opportunity to align with that wage limit. And so that's what the bill does. The county executive supports lowering the threshold, and their memo is provided on page 25 supporting that. The issue here for the committee to really consider is Councilmember Jawando's amendment as well. And so Councilmember Jawando's amendment number 2 specifically proposes a similar change by lowering the prevailing wage threshold to $250,000, but it does provide an alternative. So it's $250,000 or the state's threshold limit, whichever is lower. And so what does this mean? If the state lowers their threshold limit to $150,000, the Department Office of Procurement would choose obviously the lower amount, the $150,000. If the state raises that amount to, I don't know, $300,000 or $500,000, and these are just numbers that I'm throwing out here, then obviously the county law would align with the lower amount, which is a $250,000. And so what's on the table here for the committee to consider is the bill as introduced, aligning it directly with the prevailing wage threshold limit of $250,000, or looking at Councilmember Jawando's amendment that provides an alternative that looks at whichever is lower. It's also important for the committee to know that Baltimore County threshold limit is $300,000. It's not tied to the state. And Anne Arundel County threshold limit is $250,000, which is also not tied to the state's threshold. So I'm happy to stop there and make any clarifications or any questions from the committee.
Thank you so much. Any comments, questions from colleagues on the committee regarding this particular item? And then, of course, Councilmember Jawando's amendment. No questions? Would you like to, somebody like to move that amendment, or are we saying that without objection, we would adopt the amendment?
I don't object.
Okay, so without objection, we will adopt Councilmember Jawando's amendment. Okay, next.
Literally, Councilmember Friedson took the words out of my mouth. I said them, but I couldn't hear them.
I saw them moving, but I was like,
yeah. No. I moved my lips and he spoke. So.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've adopted Councilmember Jawando's amendment number 2 for that. So moving on to number 2. So should the definition for construction include service contracts? And really, for the council members, this is kind of a 2-part perspective. And so A talks about construction, and then B part of my memo will talk about the actual mechanical service contract. So when this bill was actually introduced, it included expanding the definition. Currently, the definition in County Code 11B1 says, construction is the process of building, altering, repairing, improving, or demolishing any structure, building, or other improvements of any kind of any real property. Construction does not include routine operation, repair, or maintenance of existing structures, buildings, or real property. The heart of this bill is to be able to expand prevailing wage to additional jobs. And one of the things with the bill is that the definition or the term service contract was too broad. And so with that being said, too broad meaning it's encompassing jobs that are not related to construction. And so it includes jobs such as custodial services, landscaping, snow removal, window washing, or street cleaning. That's not the intent of the bill. The intent of the bill is to narrow it to include construction-related jobs, specifically mechanical service-related, but we'll get to that in our B section. So what is up for the committee to consider now is, I'm scrolling down, I'm on page 4 of the memo, amending line 8. And so what amending line 8 would do was remove service contracts, which is too broad. That includes all the other service jobs that has a living wage requirement law, and instead narrowing it down to mechanical service contracts, which would now fall under prevailing wage. And so I'm going to just stop right there and see if there's any questions or clarity. But the decision point here for the committee is whether to amend the definition of construction under section 11B1 by striking service contracts from the bill and replacing it with mechanical service contracts.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion regarding this recommendation? No? Okay. Without objection, we will accept this recommendation.
Thank you.
I think you're muted, Ms. McCartney-Green.
Thank you. And also wanted to mention that Councilmember Jawando has a proposed amendment. I believe he's in support of the mechanical service contract, but one of the additional things for the definition of construction is specifically including the terminology resurfacing or pavement milling. And so the original bill as introduced did not have that as a part of the definition of construction. And so that's up for consideration of including resurfacing and pavement milling. What I will say is that under the state prevailing wage law, there is a category for that job to be classified and to be paid the prevailing wage. So just wanted to stop there and have a discussion on that amendment of adding those two terms to the definition.
Okay, thank you. I see Councilmember Friesen has his hand up, and then I'll turn to Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate before we kind of clarified what the intent of the bill was, at least as it was presented. So I think that was more of a cleanup than anything else in terms of bill drafting. On this one, I think it's about the other intent as was proposed by the sponsor and the initial proposal and some of the stakeholders, which is consistency with the state, matching the state's threshold at 250. And, from my perspective, the fact that the state includes this specific category, we ought to follow the state here as well in the interest of consistency. That seems to be, part of the purpose of the bill. So I'd be supportive of this personally. So I just wanted to state that specifically related to the overarching idea of this is to, follow the state here.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, yes, the state does do this, but also just so people know that folks, millions watching at home, the resurfacing, this is, so you don't always replace a sidewalk or a full street, or, you do the resurfacing or the milling, and that's they're involved jobs and they're very important. And it's a set of work of maintenance work that is intended, I think, in the thrust of this bill that we're trying to update. So just want to make sure it's not excluded. And so, yeah, the language Mrs. McCartney-Green said it well would be to add in the definition of construction resurfacing or pavement milling. So thank you. I appreciate it. And just wanted to provide that clarity.
Thank you. All right. Any other discussion from my committee colleagues? So without objection? Yes. Okay. So without objection, we'll accept that.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And so we're on our 2B, mechanical service contract amendments. Also another friendly amendment by Council Member Hucker. So we've refined the definition to remove service contract and actually narrow it down to mechanical service contract. And so this amendment actually defines what is a mechanical service contract. And so this would strike and amend lines 12 through 14. Mechanical service contract means a contract for service of the following systems: HVAC, which includes heating, ventilation, and cooling, air conditioning equipment, refrigeration systems, plumbing systems, electrical systems, and elevator systems, which are all classified under the state prevailing wage and have a set wage rate. And so this would, as I mentioned, narrow it down and actually define this in our county code of what type of mechanical service contracts would classify for those construction jobs. And so here, the decision point is whether to amend the bill and adopt the definition of mechanical service contracts.
Okay, any discussion from my colleagues? Without objection, I also want to remind this Director Shetty and Ms. Grandeno that if they want to chime in, just wave. All right, without objection, we will accept that recommendation.
Okay, so moving to the next decision point, and this is a little bit complex, so we'll just start with a little bit and then ask the committee if they have questions. But another amendment is for the mechanical service contracts, which we've defined in construction, which we've defined what type of mechanical service contracts. And so the next part is whether or not they should be subject to the county prevailing wage threshold. We've also going to be able to, with this bill, lower the threshold to $250,000. And so the rationale here is that mechanical service contracts are usually not as that low, and that they may be lower. And so the issue here is whether or not to adapt the McNamara-Harris service contract, which provides for contractors and subcontractors performing on these contracts in excess of $250,000 would have to pay the prevailing wage rate. And so this amendment here establishes two different thresholds. One, the 250, that's for construction contracts, and two, the 2,500 as a minimum for mechanical service contracts. And so we had a discussion, and I'm going to have a procurement chime in here, but there was a large discussion discussing the process for procurement, what happens if there is a contract below a certain amount for maintenance, and where does that fit in their process. And so I'm going to stop here just so procurement can talk about their process, and then talk about an amendment that we have that will be subject to regulations that will need some changes. But let me stop here so the committee is aware of how do they handle mechanical service contracts that may fall under a certain threshold amount.
I'm happy to let Grace provide you with more details. And also I have just in case she ends up chiming in and nobody should be surprised, I have Megan Green from OCA on this call as well, only because this particular bill touches on something that is simultaneously very specific and also very broad. But just the high level response to that is, there's a couple of things that we discussed when we had the opportunity to share our input in person. One was the fact that a lot of these services, these types of contracts are usually rolled into a bigger construction contract anyway. So it's very seldom that you'll see like a $2,500 or $5,000, specific work to do with installation. If it has to do with maintenance type of work, then we have separate contracts which are much larger when you add it up. Again, you don't go as low as $2,500. They are task order based, so as there is a need, the contractor would come in and take care of the work. And candidly, if it were anything below $10,000 doesn't actually go through the Office of Procurement. Those would be considered direct purchase orders done under the authority of the department head. So if we were to set this threshold at $2,500, it either makes it moot because most of our contracts would probably end up being larger construction contracts anyway, so that threshold is just way too low. And if it's anything below $10,000, it would just pose a challenge in terms of how it might be enforced, because it would fall upon the different departments to be aware of what they're doing. So I just want to put that it's at least maybe a 30,000 foot sense of my concerns, but I don't know if Grace or Megan have any more clarification.
Chair Navarro, if I can just step in here. And so appreciate Mr. Shetty explaining that, but also took a look back at regulations and to see where there was an opportunity, if there was an opportunity in a change in process. And so looked at the procurement regulations and noted that this amendment, is able to survive and still be able to have a separate threshold, but it would be subject to amendments in the regulations. And so happy to work with OCA and procurement to delineate where those changes need to be. So my recommendation is that this amendment is able to survive subject to amendments to the procurement regulations.
Yes, in terms of the construction maintenance type of contracts we have, we certainly do not have any contracts that are under $2,500. Most likely when we issue a maintenance type of contract, it will be a county-wide facility update maintenance contract, and that would include one or several vendors to be on that contract. And as needed basis, we will say COB needs a maintenance for this portion, and then that's one task order under that contract. And then later you may say EOB needs, the second floor needs some maintenance, and then that's another task order issued under that contract. So this one contract may have 20, 30, 40 task orders, and added up, the contract value will be certainly way over $2,500. We're probably talking about more than $250,000 instead. So that's our practice. We do not issue a single small, tiny project for under $2,500 at all. So that threshold, either the threshold number needs to be changed, or if we do include the mechanical definition in the construction, then we should be able to cover it through that amendment that we mentioned earlier.
Ms. Green and then Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you. Yes, just to reiterate, you wouldn't have a mechanical services contract or maintenance contract handled as a direct purchase, because direct purchases are for discrete one-time purchases, not ongoing services. So you wouldn't see one of those handled as an under 10,000 direct purchase anyway. Rather, what we would do is enter into contracts extending for at least a year with probably additional options, with set, wage rates in there for service calls as needed. So you're going to be way above $10,000 anyway. So as a practical matter, yes, the $2,500 would never be an issue. My concern is there's no way, it would be in passing a statute that there's no practical way to enforce if it were to be an issue, which again, it wouldn't be, because purchases under $10,000 are not monitored, but don't go through the Office of Procurement, as Ash said. They are done as direct purchases by the department heads, who usually done as P card purchases. So finance is aware of them and tracks them, but doesn't always necessarily know precisely what the purchase is for. So to make under $10,000 trackable somehow, the Department of Finance would have to be able to monitor and find out if this was a mechanical services contract purchase and so forth. Again, it would take a lot of maneuvering for something that is unrealistic in practice, because there would be no mechanical services contract for under $10,000.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding was, and the idea for this came from the advocates, for whom I think it's important to remain tied to the federal threshold. And what I'd heard before, both at MCPS and the county, is that the county had some history, and our directors had some history that, of course, people here wouldn't necessarily be aware of intentionally breaking up contracts into very small parts to avoid or evade the prevailing wage law. And that while $10,000 doesn't seem like a lot, it's certainly, when you're talking about just repair to an HVAC system or something like that, certainly possible to call in a contractor and do some work that's less than $10,000, and that we have a history in doing that and breaking up contracts into very small pieces specifically to keep wages down. And that's why the advocates had asked for alignment with the federal standard. I think I'm explaining that correctly. I don't know if there's any other experts here to chime in, but that's been my experience that I've heard for years at multiple events with some of the unions and other folks that do that kind of service contract work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of a disconnect here because I've also heard from mechanical trades workers who seem to be very intent on this being a critical piece to them. And it seems odd that county government, we don't think that this would have a practical impact, but the folks who would be hired seem to think it have a huge impact. So I'm trying to understand and reconcile that, to be honest with you, because those both can't be true. So I'm not sure what the missing link or piece here is. It is interesting if the federal government standard is 2,500, and we're saying this is so far below what the county would be. I mean, I like when we tie ourselves to another standard. I think this bill is tying us generally to the state. There is a federal standard. I think we have a lot of ground to stand on when we say we're tying ourselves to the federal standard. This work doesn't happen in a vacuum. People are bidding on federal work, they're bidding on county work, they're bidding on state work. I think the consistency is generally helpful. So I just, maybe executive staff could flesh out a little bit more, why they think that discrepancy might exist and what the issue would be. You'd still be in control of the regs. So you could address, at least from my perspective, it would seem some of the issues and concerns, which I'm sure are legitimate. You do this work every day through that reg process that you'd be proposing to us, but we could tie ourselves to the federal standards. So I'm just trying to understand, number one, where you think that discrepancy lies and what the disconnect perhaps is, and number two, why proposing regs that you would frankly be in control of course we would approve, but you would be in control of, would pose too much of a challenge to be able to actually implement it. So if you could just respond to that, that'd be helpful to me.
Ash, do you want me to respond to that first?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Davis-Bacon, that's the federal prevailing wage law, was in place since probably 30, 40 years ago. And the threshold of the whole bill plus this $2,500 was in there from the beginning of the bill. And I don't believe Davis-Bacon has ever reviewed the threshold and updated it with today's market. So we always know that Davis-Bacon's threshold in terms of application of prevailing wage law. For example, the state used to have $500,000, now it's lower to $250,000. Davis-Bacon, I don't recall exactly the amount, but we're probably talking about only $5,000 or $6,000. So maybe back then the construction projects were at that level of value, dollar values, but now I don't know why they never went back and tried to look at the market and change the dollar amount. But for at least for our county's construction contracts, we know for even smaller job type of contracts, usually we're looking at about $250,000 as a whole contract value. Certainly some task orders within that contract would be at a lower amount, but usually even the single task orders within those contracts would be over $10,000. So in terms of what you are hearing from the maybe vendors about these smaller jobs, I don't know the details, but I'm suspecting that some of them are probably getting a one-time job from a using department to just come to fix a small thing. And if it's under $10,000, again, the using department will just pay them with a P card, and that was not through a contract. So it did not come through procurement, then we wouldn't be able to track that. Same as other direct purchase that the using department would have full authority over. We do a annual review on all the direct purchase that was done during that year, and we would look at all the purchases that around $9,000 to make sure that they are not using this method to just repeatedly buy certain service. If that's the case, then they should have had a contract to begin with. So we do that work not only for prevailing wage related contracts, also for other type of services or goods purchasing. So that's one scenario. The other scenario could be this was under a contract, but it was a task order based contract. And then maybe that one task order was so small, but I still suspect it wouldn't be as small as $2,500. But let's say if it's a task order under $10,000 under a contract, then for sure, before the prevailing wage law, if it was a services maintenance type of contract, then it wasn't under prevailing wage law. That's what we are trying to amend here, to include those into prevailing wage law. They were under the wage requirements law, which was the services rate, which is $15.40 per hour. Ash or Megan, did you want to add anything?
I think what you just said probably explains what Councilmember Friedson's concern was, this idea that how can these both be true simultaneously. I think the second scenario that you explained kind of, it squares it for me, because I had a hard time thinking about what hypothetical would make this possible. But I think in a world prior to this bill being passed, with the aspects of it we all agree on, I could see a small task order being under a certain dollar value. Obviously, because that entire contract would have been under the wage requirements law, that somebody might have misconstrued that as somehow it having been fragmented to avoid prevailing wage law, when in reality, prevailing wage law, the way we were set up, would never have kicked in. Going forward, it would, and then that concern would no longer be valid, because even if that task order were for, let's say, $3,000, it would still have now the prevailing wage law carried.
Yes, just to piggyback on that, task orders should not be paid at a different rate than the contract under which they're ordered. The overarching contract for the year, for the 2 years or whatever, will set the wage rate under which each task order should be paid. So once we lower the threshold value, I did have a conversation with Ludine yesterday, and I think that one of the easiest ways to handle this might be an amendment to the direct purchase regulations that clarifies that mechanical services contracts cannot be handled, or purchases cannot be handled as a direct purchase. And that way, instead of trying to shoehorn everything around and changing a whole bunch of factors around that, then we're just clear that for a mechanical services contract, it can't be a direct purchase. You're going to have a written contract going through the Office of Procurement, and then the prevailing wage threshold would kick in.
Interesting.
Or using an existing mechanical maintenance contract that we may already have.
Right, and that should be done. And to Councilmember Friedson's point, so split transactions do happen. They're not supposed to. The Office of Finance has a whole system in place to try to catch split transactions, which is a department trying to avoid going through procurement in order to, and splitting transactions into under $10,000 as direct purchases. The Department of Finance is generally very good at catching those. Every month, I think, Ash, every quarter, I don't know, they send a whole list of potential split transactions to procurement for review. So those two departments do work together. Sometimes OCA is brought in to attempt to catch any departments doing this. Obviously, the department heads are all aware that they're not supposed to do that. And by and large, I think that the Department of Finance has been very successful in getting the message out, in effectively training departments to avoid split transactions.
Thank you. I do want to be mindful of the time because there is a GO Public Safety Committee at 2 p.m. So let's see, Councilmember Friedson, any additional questions or thoughts on this?
I would happy to yield to the sponsor here. I'm not entirely sure if what is being suggested is an amendment, like a different amendment to this bill, or separately to take that up outside of this bill. So I was just hoping for clarification on that, but happy to yield to the bill sponsor and his thoughts in general on this approach.
Thank you. Councilmember Hooker.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Councilmember Friedson, what you said about the benefit of being tied to another standard. And I don't think it's very important whether or not the federal standard's been updated from 2500. The fact is that we've had a history in Montgomery County, and we've had numerous both contractors who have lost work and worker representatives tell me that we've had directors break up contracts to avoid the prevailing wage law. So I don't think people would be saying that over a period of years if it weren't happening. And I don't think the challenge that Director Shetty mentioned of just notifying directors seems like a significant burden to me. Maybe it's more complicated than I would think, but notifying directors seems like something we probably do routinely. And I understand it may not be perfectly enforced, or maybe a challenge to enforce within procurement if it's smaller than 10,000, but we have many, many laws, as everybody knows, that are not perfectly enforced. I still think it would be important to try to cover all the work possible. That's the spirit of the bill. So I don't understand the benefit of moving away from the lower standard and the federal threshold, but that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Councilmember Katz.
Wage rates. And so I do want to tell the committee, still want to be able to look at if there's anything else that's lingering that the council may not be aware of, or that the council staff will be able to take a look at. But we would need a transition language to ameliorate that as well.
Go ahead, Bob. It sounds like you want to chime in on that one too.
Yes, Bob is.
Yeah, just since I did the bill, the 2920 bill, I don't know the answer to this, but I don't think they've already received the pilot. I don't think they've already gotten that far. But I'm not really sure. I don't keep track of developments, but the Grosvenor development, I mean, that whole deal was made under Bill 2920. If you now change it and they haven't already gotten the pilot, that would be kind of changing the deal that you've already done. Whether you could do that legally or not, yeah, probably, if they haven't gotten the pilot, but whether you want to do that, well, this is a different question.
Yeah, and also there's they could receive the pilot. I think it's also important to say, like, they could receive the pilot, they would just have to pay a prevailing wage, right? I mean, that it's not about receiving the pilot or not. It's about, to receive it, you'd have to pay the prevailing wage.
Yeah, the pilot is is a property tax abatement for, right, and not necessarily tied to construction. It doesn't change the cost of construction for the, to build the building.
Right.
It's not, we're not really financing the construction. It's the entire development, the ongoing, that their rents they'll be able to have lower rents because they don't have to pay property tax for some units. It's not really to fund construction.
Right. My point is, it's a set, you can receive a pilot in under the law and just have to pay a prevailing wage. And there's a ton of, we presented at the time research about that paying a life-sustaining wage, prevailing wage, doesn't actually increase construction costs to the extent that some folks claim. So, that's a policy debate. But I just wanted to make it clear for colleagues that we can do this, and that I think we should, and I don't think we should create the false choice of that it's either affordable housing or transit-oriented development, or pay people that build those things a fair wage. I think we can do both. And there's other subsidies that can be brought to bear or direct, if to make deals work, but it shouldn't be on the back of the workers. I think that's what this is. And it's not about a project going forward or not. It's about paying people a fair wage to build these projects, which is the intent of this whole bill. And I think to exclude large projects like that would not be in line with the intent. So, and I know the trade unions support this as well. And I think this would be, something we should move forward with. So, and then the other piece we would need to do, to Ms. Green's point, would be we would need to remove the lines 29 to 40. So I don't know if Ms. McCartney Green, you want to talk about that just references the exception for HOC and others, because that would contradict paying this prevailing wage.
Correct. Right now it excludes it. So yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Joando. Councilmember Friedson.
Thanks. First of all, we still don't have a fiscal impact statement on this bill, right? I just want to express my frustration on that. I'll just say my recollection could be off here, but I believe it was already extended to December the 7th when this was postponed, and the fact that more than a month later we still don't have a fiscal impact statement is pretty disappointing. But and I do think as part of this discussion that would be helpful. To be perfectly honest with you, it would also be helpful to have an understanding from DHCA on their opinion on this, as council staff noted earlier. I appreciate you saying that, but I just wanted clarification as well, because it's not just about the affordable housing projects that have been discussed here that this amendment seems to potentially have an impact on. What would be the impact, for instance, on projects like Viva White Oak, where the county has made a commitment for roads? It would be helpful to understand, would prevailing wage be required for the roads, which is a dollar for dollar match up to $40 million as part of that deal, for instance? Would it be for the entire project, since that is what is making, potentially making the project move forward? Similarly, other projects, that are, that have some type of arrangement, like with Wall Park in North Bethesda, for instance, where the county is purchasing parking spaces from a potential private housing development. Would the prevailing wage only impact the spaces that the county is purchasing? Would it impact the construction of the garage itself, including the private spaces? Would it involve the entire project, including the private housing, in addition to the parking garage? Similarly with Farm Women's Market in Bethesda, a similar deal where the county is doing land swaps or other types of things like this. If a land swap were to be taking place, for instance, like for a park, the focus of this conversation, the focus in the packet, has been about the WMATA bill and that pilot, which is important. It's obviously something that we've already discussed and are continuing to discuss, but I think it would be helpful to understand if there are broader implications of the changing definition here to other things that the county does. And I think it would be helpful if the executive branch, who has negotiated many of those deals and is responsible for many of those deals, gave some answers to that and had some position on what, if any, impact it would have beyond just DHCA, because this isn't, at least for my read of it, and I'm not a lawyer, don't play one on Zoom, this would have potentially broader implications than just the housing piece, which is what has been the focus of this conversation. I just think that information would be helpful. Thanks.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too can't understand why we didn't get the fiscal impact statement. We've asked for it, we need it. That's the reason we asked for it. And I do think we should hear from DHCA. Having said that, I do believe that we should seriously consider, until you get all the information, you shouldn't say, for sure, but I think we should seriously consider doing this, but I think we probably would be wise to do this at full council rather than hold this up at this point to come back and then have to go back to full council. I think that would be the best way to go forward with it. But the whole idea for the P3s, absolutely, we should be doing it for the P3s, but we should be doing it for this as well. But to Councilmember Jawando's point and to Mr. Drummer's point, I do believe we should be concerned about if we've made a promise to WMATA or whoever, that we don't just say, we're just kidding. If we've made a promise to them, which we did, then we have to make certain that we're fulfilling what we said. And then if we've changed our mind, we should go forward with what this would be doing. So I believe at this point, we should go forward with this legislation and then have for this part of the conversation, have it at full council.
Thank you. So I agree. It is important that we're doing this comprehensively, and I think that is critical. I think especially as we are looking towards what this post-COVID-19 recovery will look like. This is a very important bill. And I do also agree that we should not be making, just blanket exceptions. However, not having all of that information in front of us and not understanding the implications of it is something that concerns me. Because what I don't want to do is just go ahead and say, sure. And then later on, we find out that, I don't know, a project, again, like the Viva White Oak, in terms of that kind of agreement that was made, et cetera, that somehow has been affected, et cetera. So I do believe, Ms. McCartney Green, that we need to request, more information. I think we can send you some of those questions in writing. So we can have it all in a document and then bring it back to full council. So there's a clear understanding, if it's possible to just grandfather some stuff or just, do this moving forward, however it is that we can proceed with hopefully honoring this notion of making sure that people are paid a prevailing wage while not derailing projects that actually are there to help the same folks that we want to support long term, right? Creating opportunities in parts of the county that have not been addressed before. So I think having that information is going to be important. Councilmember Jawando, if I hope that you understand the spirit of this this decision. But I appreciate you bringing it up, and again, I think that we do need to have that basic information to make an informed decision. However, I would not want to hold, the rest of the bill and say that we need to come back for another session. I think that we should finish what we need to finish, and then we'll go to full council. Hopefully, by then we'll have some specifics that we can react to and see how we can achieve both goals.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, and I totally appreciate that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I certainly want the bill as a colleague sponsor. I wanted to pass too, and I think I appreciate everyone saying that. In my understanding, just in my inquiries, and I do think it is unacceptable, absolutely, that we don't have a fiscal impact statement. I don't understand that either, and that we should have we should have input from the executive branch. Like, these aren't new amendments. I've been talking about this since for a while. So we need to figure that out. But from the conversations I have had, I just want to offer for the committee and for colleagues, as far as I'm concerned, and my intent here is to not go backwards, it's to go forwards. And so anything that has been agreed to or is in place, or even if the ink isn't dry, to Bob's point on, if they haven't actually received the pilot yet, I mean, there has to be a mechanism of a way, DHCA has the authority to authorize pilots. And so I would think that we should figure out a way to have it go forward looking and not backward looking. So I think there's a way to do that. And I agree with you on that, and would be happy to continue the conversation at full council. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I'm sure Mr. Drummer will also work with Ms. McCartney Green to figure out some ways. What we don't want to do is change the rules of the game midway. That it's not fair. So we'll find a way forward. All right, Ms. McCartney Green, what was the other piece? Oh,
And
Councilor Katz.
thank you very much. I just believe that we should, in order to continue to move this forward, I believe we should give the executive's office a deadline on when they can get this information to us. To say, well, this has been dragging on longer than it should. We need a deadline. It needs to be practical, but we need a deadline so that they can get this information to us. And I also wanted to say that I have met Councilmember Jawando before, and I know that this will be brought back up at full council, as it should be. But I think we need to get this information in a practical amount of time. Thanks.
Thank you. I do too. So we'll work with staff to make sure that is relayed, that request is relayed. All right, Ms. McCartney Green next. I think we're going to start public safety and GEO at 2:15 to make sure that we.
I was cognizant of the time, so.
Yeah.
The last issue, and it's certainly not the least, it's the local hiring mandate that is in the bill, specifically lines 75 through 82. And essentially it requires at least 51% of the new jobs to complete the county finance construction contract that exceeds the prevailing wage threshold must be filled by Montgomery County residents. And then the bill does provide a waiver. The Director of Office of Procurement, upon a good faith showing by the contractor developer that they're unable to meet the hiring standard, does have the discretion whether or not to alleviate that requirement. Although through council staff research, you're looking at local hiring mandate in various jurisdictions, realize that the purpose of the provision is to enrich equitable hiring, to reflect the demographics of the community, keep local income tax in the county, and to maintain economic stability. The unfortunate part is that it is fraught with possible legal challenges. The Office of County Attorney has opined on the issue as well, and believe that it may face some judicial scrutiny because it might be a violation of the Privilege and Immunity Clause. And so what is that saying? Essentially, a residency requirement that excludes certain citizens from different jurisdictions, you have to have a substantial reason for the legislation. And that justification may support a residency mandate. Probably in the beginning of our conversation, it talked about other jurisdictions that have prevailing wage laws that have also adopted the same. And Arundel County has adopted a local hiring mandate. Baltimore County has adopted, and so did Howard County has adopted a local hiring mandate. So far, to our knowledge, this has not been challenged. Doesn't mean that it can't, but from our to date has not been challenged. Council staff has looked at it and in conversation with the Office of County Attorney, with Megan Green, stepped back and said that there's a few things to think about. If the committee decides to keep the provision, there are legal and administrative concerns. But what would happen is that if challenged, a court of law would be able to sever and strike that provision of the local hiring mandate and preserve the rest of the legislation. And so that's one option for the committee to look at, whether or not they would align and join other counties that are kind of in the same position as well. In addition to that, council staff looked at other alternatives or possible amendments as well. And so really at the end of my packet or my memo, but one of the first things that is really suggested is a study, just to take a step back and look at requiring the executive to establish a task force or a consultant to look at what are our hiring practices in the county. Is it local workers? What is the average of local workers? What is the revenue loss? And so that's one option as an alternative, and saw that as being very fruitful in some of the other cases